For months, countless headlines have focused on one question: can Ukraine destroy the Kerch Bridge? It is an understandable question. The bridge has become one of the most recognizable symbols of Russia's control over Crimean, the most visible land connection between the peninsula and mainland Russia. Every time explosions are reported nearby or traffic is temporarily suspended, speculation immediately follows. Has the bridge finally been taken out? Has one of the most important supply routes in the war been severed? But modern warfare rarely revolves around a single dramatic moment. Military campaigns are often decided long before a bridge collapses or a major structure disappears from the map. More often, they are shaped by something far less visible: the gradual erosion of an opponent's ability to move fuel, ammunition, equipment, and personnel at the pace required to sustain combat operations. That appears to be the larger strategic picture emerging across southern Ukraine. Rather than focusing exclusively on destroying one iconic structure, Ukraine has increasingly concentrated on placing continuous pressure across the entire logistics network that supports Russian operations in Crimea and the southern front. Under this approach, every disrupted convoy, every delayed rail movement, every temporary air-raid warning, and every additional security inspection becomes part of a much broader campaign. Individually, these incidents may seem minor. Collectively, they can slow the operational rhythm that modern armies depend upon. For Russia, the Kerch Bridge remains enormously significant not only because of its political symbolism, but because of its logistical role. The crossing connects mainland Russia with Crimea, allowing military supplies, fuel, heavy equipment, civilian goods, and reinforcements to move toward the peninsula before continuing to units deployed farther south. Open-source military assessments have consistently described it as one of several critical corridors supporting Russian operations in the region. Yet precisely because of its importance, it is also one of the most heavily protected locations in the entire theater. Over the past several years, Russia has invested substantial resources into defending the bridge and the surrounding Kerch Strait. Layered air-defense systems, electronic warfare assets, radar coverage, patrol vessels, and rapid repair capabilities have all been concentrated around the crossing. Military analysts generally agree that attacking the bridge directly is considerably more difficult than striking most other infrastructure targets inside occupied territory. This defensive concentration changes the military equation. Every additional layer of protection forces an attacker to commit greater resources while also revealing valuable information to the defender. Failed drone attacks, intercepted cruise missiles, or unsuccessful strike attempts all provide Russia with opportunities to observe attack profiles, adjust defensive procedures, improve radar coverage, and refine interception tactics. In other words, the more valuable the target, the faster both sides adapt around it. That adaptation has gradually influenced Ukraine's broader operational approach. Instead of viewing the bridge as the only objective, increasing attention has shifted toward the wider logistics architecture connected to it. Military logistics do not depend on a single road or a single railway. They rely on an interconnected system of storage depots, maintenance facilities, rail junctions, fuel sites, vehicle parks, and transportation corridors extending hundreds of kilometers beyond the bridge itself. Disrupting that network does not necessarily require collapsing its most famous structure. Sometimes forcing traffic to slow is almost as valuable as stopping it entirely. Military logistics function according to rhythm as much as volume. Convoys must depart on schedule. Fuel must arrive before reserves fall below operational requirements. Ammunition deliveries must synchronize with planned combat operations. Maintenance units require spare parts before damaged vehicles accumulate beyond repair capacity. Once that rhythm begins to slow, even modest delays can compound across the system. A convoy delayed by several hours may miss a scheduled transfer point. A rail shipment postponed for security inspections can force downstream deliveries to be rescheduled. Additional air-defense precautions may require military vehicles to travel in smaller groups, reducing efficiency while increasing the number of separate movements needed to transport the same quantity of supplies. None of these disruptions appears decisive on its own. Together, however, they create what military planners often describe as operational friction. Operational friction represents the countless small inefficiencies that gradually reduce an army's ability to function at maximum effectiveness. More fuel is consumed transporting the same cargo. More personnel are required to coordinate movements. More time is spent waiting instead of delivering. Commanders become less certain that supplies will arrive exactly when planned. For frontline formations, uncertainty itself becomes a logistical burden. This broader perspective also explains why discussions surrounding future Ukrainian strike capabilities receive so much attention among defense analysts. Current Russian air defenses around the Kerch Strait are widely assessed to be optimized against many of the threats Ukraine has employed throughout the war, including drones and cruise missiles following relatively predictable approach paths. Future generations of longer range strike systems, particularly faster ballistic profiles that compress defensive reaction times, could present a different technical challenge, although the extent of that challenge would ultimately depend on operational deployment, production scale, and Russia's own continuing defensive adaptations. The significance lies less in any single weapon than in how defensive resources must be allocated. Protecting one fixed target is difficult. Protecting an entire logistics network stretching from mainland Russia through Crimea and into occupied southern Ukraine is considerably more demanding. Every additional radar station, interceptor battery, electronic warfare system, or patrol unit assigned to one sector becomes a resource unavailable somewhere else. That creates a constant balancing problem for military planners. As Ukraine expands pressure across roads, railways, storage sites, maintenance facilities, bridges, and transportation nodes, Russia must continuously decide where defensive assets should be concentrated and which areas inevitably receive less protection. That dynamic, not a single dramatic strike, may prove to be one of the defining logistical contests of the Southern campaign. For months, much of the world's attention has remained fixed on one structure, the Kerch Bridge. Every report, every satellite image, and every explosion has fueled the same question: could Ukraine eventually destroy Russia's most symbolic connection to Crimea? But modern military campaigns are rarely decided by a single bridge. They are decided by the ability to keep an entire logistics network functioning under constant pressure. And that is where the real story begins. Military logistics operate according to a simple principle. Supplies only matter if they arrive on time. Fuel has value only when armored vehicles can reach the battlefield. Ammunition matters only when artillery batteries receive it before an operation begins. Spare parts only matter if damaged vehicles return to service before the next offensive. When those deliveries become unpredictable, even without a single catastrophic strike, the effectiveness of an entire force begins to decline. This appears to be the pressure Ukraine is attempting to create across southern Ukraine. Rather than relying on one decisive attack, the strategy increasingly focuses on generating continuous operational friction. Every temporary rail disruption, every drone alert that forces convoys to pause, every logistics hub that requires emergency repairs, and every rerouted shipment adds another layer of delay. Individually, none of these events changes the battlefield. Collectively, they force commanders to plan around uncertainty instead of reliability. That distinction is critical. A military supply network is designed around rhythm. Convoys leave on schedule. Rail traffic follows carefully coordinated timetables. Fuel depots are replenished before reserves become critically low. Maintenance facilities expect replacement parts to arrive within planned windows. Once that rhythm begins to slow, every level of the system starts compensating for uncertainty. Larger reserve stockpiles become necessary. Transportation becomes more cautious. Delivery schedules grow less predictable. Resources that would normally support combat operations must instead be diverted toward protecting the supply chain itself. Crimea occupies an especially important position within that system. Beyond its political symbolism, the peninsula serves as a major logistics hub supporting Russian operations across southern Ukraine. Supplies moving through Crimea contribute to vehicle maintenance, engineering support, medical evacuation, fuel distribution, and the movement of personnel toward multiple sectors. Any sustained pressure affecting those transportation routes therefore extends far beyond the bridge itself. The question becomes less about whether traffic can continue, and more about whether it can continue at the pace required for large-scale military operations. This is where Ukraine's expanding long-range drone campaign becomes increasingly significant. Unlike earlier stages of the war, recent operations have demonstrated a growing emphasis on striking logistics infrastructure far behind the front line. Fuel storage facilities, railway junctions, maintenance depots, command centers, and transportation nodes have all become recurrent targets. These locations may lack the dramatic visibility of frontline battles, but they perform functions that are difficult to replace quickly. A damaged fuel depot delays multiple convoys. A disrupted railway junction forces shipments onto slower road networks. A maintenance facility operating below capacity keeps damaged vehicles out of service longer than planned. None of these effects appears decisive in isolation. Their value comes from accumulation. Modern militaries consume enormous quantities of resources every day. Fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, engineering equipment, communication systems, replacement parts, and construction materials all move continuously through an interconnected logistics architecture. The larger the force, the greater the daily demand becomes. Any sustained reduction in transportation efficiency therefore produces effects that compound over time rather than appearing immediately. Military analysts have long observed that logistics rarely fail overnight. Instead, operational capability gradually erodes. Vehicle availability declines as repairs take longer. Artillery units begin conserving ammunition. Fuel distribution becomes more tightly controlled. Reserve stockpiles shrink faster than they can be replenished. Commanders become increasingly cautious because future deliveries cannot be guaranteed with the same confidence as before. The result is not necessarily battlefield collapse. More often, it is the gradual loss of operational flexibility. At the same time, Russia faces a second challenge that receives far less public attention. Every defensive system protecting one critical location cannot simultaneously protect another. Air-minus defense batteries, electronic warfare systems, radar installations, interceptor missiles, maintenance crews, and security personnel all represent finite resources. Concentrating them around high-minus value assets such as the Kirk Bridge inevitably leaves fewer available elsewhere across the broader logistics network. That creates an enduring strategic dilemma. If protection around the bridge is strengthened, transportation corridors farther inland become relatively more exposed. If additional defenses shift toward those overland routes, the bridge itself temporarily receives less concentrated coverage. As Ukraine continues expanding the number of potential targets across southern Ukraine, Russian planners are forced into a continuous process of prioritizations rather than comprehensive protection. In military planning, initiative often belongs to the side that chooses where and when pressure will be applied. The defender, regardless of available resources, must constantly react. Another important factor shaping this evolving contest involves future strike capabilities. Although discussion frequently centers on drones and cruise missiles, analysts have increasingly examined the implications of longer range precision weapons that follow different flight profiles. Ballistic systems, for example, present a distinct set of technical challenges because of their speed, trajectory, and compressed interception timelines. Whether such capabilities eventually become operational at meaningful scale remains uncertain, but even the possibility influences defensive planning today. Military organizations routinely prepare for threats before those threats fully materialize, and doing so requires additional investment, additional planning, and additional resource allocation. In other words, future capabilities can influence today's battlefield long before they are widely deployed. Meanwhile, civilian infrastructure across Crimea also reflects many of the same logistical pressures affecting military transportation. Because civilian and military supply systems inevitably overlap, disruptions in one area often generate consequences in the other. Fuel availability, transportation schedules, commercial activity, and broader economic stability all become increasingly sensitive when logistics networks operate under sustained pressure. These civilian effects do not determine military outcomes by themselves, but they illustrate how prolonged disruption can extend beyond purely military calculations. Taken together, the broader picture becomes clearer. The campaign surrounding Crimea is no longer defined solely by the possibility of destroying one bridge. Instead, it increasingly resembles a contest over sustainability. Can transportation continue operating at the required tempo? Can supply chains remain reliable under constant pressure? Can defensive resources protect an expanding list of critical assets without creating vulnerabilities elsewhere? These questions may ultimately prove more important than the fate of any individual structure. Bridges can be repaired. Rail lines can reopen. Damaged facilities can eventually return to service. Rebuilding confidence in an entire logistics network is far more difficult. Once commanders begin planning under the assumption that delays are inevitable rather than exceptional, the entire operating rhythm changes. Reserve inventories increase. Transportation slows. Convoys become more cautious. Operational plans require larger safety margins. Every decision becomes more conservative because uncertainty has become part of the system itself. That may ultimately be the deeper objective of sustained logistics pressure. The Kirk Bridge may continue standing. Trains may continue crossing. Military vehicles may continue moving toward the south. Yet the strategic question is no longer whether traffic exists. It is whether that traffic can sustain the speed, predictability, and volume required for prolonged military operations. Modern wars are often remembered through dramatic moments captured on camera, but historians frequently identify a different cause behind major turning points. Not a single explosion, not one spectacular strike. Instead, they point to the gradual weakening of the logistics systems that allowed armies to keep fighting. And that is precisely why the struggle over Crimea has become far larger than one bridge. It has become a contest over endurance over whether a military can continue sustaining its forces while every part of its supply network operates under increasing pressure. The bridge itself may remain intact. The real question is whether the system supporting it can continue carrying the weight of the war.